So at this point, I've made 11 bajillion videos on why I don't think Jesus was a historical person. But I have not yet made one that addresses what I really think happened. So for those of you who have been on this journey with me, this is that video. In a previous video, I talked about the book of Zechariah, which mentions a character named Jesus, son of Josedek. He's referred to as the branch who will rebuild the temple of the Lord. It's also important to recall that the successor to Moses, who led the Israelites into the Promised Land, was named Joshua, or Yeshua, or Jesus in Greek. And it's during the first century that the Jews are living in their Promised Land, but they are subject to a foreign power again. And this is where the original Jesus sect comes in, which I believe was a group of apocalyptic Jews that were living in the first century BCE to the first century CE, somewhere in there. They actually used the Septuagint to craft a mythical biography for their expected Savior, whom they called Jesus after the character in the book of Zechariah. It was around this time that Saul of Tarsus was on the road to Damascus and had a vision, hallucination of the crucified and risen Jesus Christ. Paul takes great pains to point out that he did not receive his gospel from any man, that he received all he knows of Jesus and his gospel from his mystical visions of the risen Christ. It seems, according to Paul anyway, that the bar for joining the group known as the apostles was to have had a mystical vision of Jesus. Paul's innovation, though, was that in his vision, Christ is already crucified and resurrected. This would account for why Paul argues so vociferously with people who, at least as far as we know, were supposed to have known Jesus in real life. But if there was no Jesus in real life, if Jesus was only ever just bits and pieces of stories from the Septuagint and mystical visions, then no one's vision would be any more valid than anybody else's. And so Paul would feel completely justified in arguing with people who, again, from our perspective, are supposed to have known Jesus in real life about what he said and did and what he really meant. It's around this time that the mythical biography of Jesus, constructed by the original apostles, is taken and inserted into a historical context. Maybe an evangelist like Paul does this because maybe this is an easier way to teach the gospel. If you can put it into a historical framework that people understand, remove it from the solely mythical and put it into the real world, maybe it's just easier to spread the message that you're trying to spread. This would account for all of the contradictions in the four canonical gospels. Because if all they were working with was a bare bones framework based on certain prophecies pulled from the Septuagint, then they would have been free to flesh out the story as they saw fit, including raiding the Septuagint for other prophecies that were salient to them and their own communities, because those were the theological issues that they were concerned with at that time. So you tell me what you think. I'm not going to claim that this is 100% what happened, but I will say that I think this is more plausible than a historical Jesus. A historical Jesus actually just kind of overcomplicates matters. If you have somebody that was born in a specific time and place and had family members and friends and people who knew him, it would be very, very difficult to retroactively dress him up in all of these different ideas because the people who knew him would be there to say, no, that's not what happened. But if he is purely a mythical character with just a framework of a life story, you can do whatever you want with him. And it, to me anyway, seems like that's exactly what happened.